Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. We will just wait a moment for everyone to join the session. Okay, we will get started. Welcome to today's Charity Village webinar. My name is Mercedes, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Specialist with Charity Village. As we are gathering here in a virtual platform, it is important to acknowledge that each of us is joining this webinar from the ancestral or unceded lands of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people. As a settler on this land, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Anishinaabe, which includes the Ojibwe of Fort William First Nation. For those who may be joining a Charity Village webinar for the first time, Charity Village is Canada's largest online job board for the nonprofit sector. In addition to our online job board, organizations can also post volunteer positions. So if you are looking for work or to recruit talent in the sector, Charity Village is a great place to start. We also have a ton of excellent resources for nonprofit professionals, including online courses, articles, fundraising tools, and free webinars like the one we are presenting today. Before we start today's webinar, I would like to quickly run through some housekeeping items. You may have noticed when you joined the webinar that you were automatically put on mute. Since we have hundreds of participants in today's session, it is important for us to minimize the amount of background noise so that everyone can clearly hear the presentation. But you can still ask questions and make comments using the question box at the bottom of the Zoom control panel. Look for that at the bottom of your screen. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, so please submit your questions as you think of them, and we will do our best to get to as many as possible. You can also email your questions to webinars@charityvillage.com. If you happen to encounter any technical issues with the webinar, whether with viewing the presentation or with the audio, please let us know in the question box or by sending us an email. We will do our best to get any technical difficulties resolved as quickly as possible, but in a worst case scenario, please remember that we are recording today's webinar and we will send you the full recording by email tomorrow. So if you get called away or disconnected, you will still be able to view the full presentation. And with that, I'd like to welcome our presenters for today, Omar Visram, founder and CEO of Ankle Back Office Solutions, and Robin Jones, head of marketing, Ankle Back Office Solutions. Welcome.
Great, thank you for that introduction. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the co-founder, CEO of Ankle. I started Ankle in 2016 after spending most of my career at a Big Four accounting firm in Vancouver. Since launching Ankle, we have in many cases outsourced services where we found the opportunity to do so. In the process, I've learned a lot about finding the right service provider and making relationships with service providers long-lasting and productive. Of course, at Ankle, we replace or augment the financial operations of our clients. And as a result, we focus a lot of our energy on trying to ensure that these relationships add long-term value to the organizations that we work with. I hope to share more about this experience with you today. And on the webinar with me today is Robin Jones, our fractional head of marketing at Ankle. Robin has been a marketing leader, advisor, and mentor for over 30 years, and throughout her career has led both large and small teams and has often outsourced a variety of services herself. She brings extensive knowledge and experience, particularly in the area of outsourcing sales and marketing functions. A little bit about Ankle. Ankle was co-founded in 2016 with a simple problem in mind. You can't build a great organization without good books. Today, we have over 300 clients. We've worked with over 100 not-for-profit organizations across Canada, and we have 80 team members with what we call a global delivery model. We have a focus on financial operations. So to be clear, we don't do advisory work, tax work, or assurance work, being year-end audit work. Ankle would like to acknowledge that our offices are situated on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Just another housekeeping item before I go further. In the event that you have a question or would like to receive the free outsourcing guide we're offering, please be sure to drop your email in the chat. We may run out of time for questions, and if we have your contact information, we'll be sure to get back to you with a response. Just looking at this slide here, a little bit more about Ankle. These are the 5 core services that we offer. And all of our not-for-profit clients today purchase some combination of these services with a particular focus on bookkeeping and controllership services. In terms of the agenda today, what we'll cover is 1, why you should consider outsourcing, 2, what is outsourcing, 3, labor market trends that we're seeing, 4, the pros and cons of outsourcing, and 5, best practices when you are outsourcing. So why should you consider outsourcing? In this section, we're going to explore some of the primary benefits to outsourcing. So one thing is certain, not-for-profit leaders have limited time and resources. How you manage both is key to delivering on your mission. Outsourcing can help you achieve a few of the following. So scalability, grow or reduce capacity as needed with fewer resources required to hire and train. 2, reduced management overhead, limited time spent overseeing non-core functions. The reality is this is the one that I usually see people thinking about and putting the least emphasis on. The third here is cost efficiency, pay for what you need. So it's more cost effective. And the fourth item here is expertise, really hiring the right people to do exceptional work. The financial benefits of outsourcing. So just to summarize some research that CPA Canada did in 2019, what they found is that organizations that outsource their accounting, so this is specific to accounting, found increased profits, so 28% compared to 16% that didn't outsource, increased revenue, so 23% compared to 14% that didn't outsource. Organizations that found more time to focus on their business or their operations, 80%. And then 68% of respondents found that accounting was made easier and more efficient. And 53% found that they worried less about errors. So significant benefits, as you can see, from the pool of 1,700. This is businesses, of course, but the same concepts can be applied to not-for-profit organizations. The hidden value of outsourcing. So one thing that often happens when evaluating whether to outsource or whether to have a function held internally is that we don't really understand the true cost of having a person in the function. And what this, what this often means is we think of the base salary, but we don't think about the other taxes, the CPP, the EI, stat pay, vacation pay, additional benefits that you might offer, the cost of onboarding and training an employee, your cost, perhaps as a leader in a not-for-profit organization, in managing somebody in that function, and then also overhead costs, including their workstation, computer, if you do have a physical office environment. But this stat down here, I think, really sums it up well, that it's reported that an employee costs 1.2 to 1.4 times their base salary. And this doesn't include recruiting and replacing an employee when turnover occurs. There is an example on the side here that sort of puts this in mathematical terms. An employee, it just shows basically, the expected cost, if you just take the salary into account at $1,820 a month, but the true cost when loaded for the additional 20 to 40% overhead gets you to $2,180 or $2,500. Now imagine if it's, even a larger number, if you're outsourcing a number of functions, the savings can be quite significant to your organization. All right, outsourcing defined. I'm going to hand it over to Robin for this section.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'm sure most of you have a pretty good idea of what outsourcing is all about, but I thought we'd take a moment just to be really clear about what we mean. So outsourcing is when an organization hires a third party to perform tasks or handle operations or provide services for the organization. That outside company is typically referred to as a service provider or third-party provider, and they arrange for their own workers and or computer systems to perform the tasks or services either on-site at your facility or at their own facilities, or even from external locations. Outsourcing is most commonly used for non-core functions, and we'll get into a little bit of what I mean by that in a minute. But according to Deloitte, in 2023, there's going to be $731 billion spent on outsourcing. So quite a few people leaning this direction, as Omar pointed out, to cut costs, to maximize expertise, et cetera. So we're going to stop for a second and just take a poll of the audience. So I'd just like to know, do you guys currently outsource any roles or functions at your nonprofit? And it's a simple yes or no question. So I'll wait a second and let everybody participate in this poll. And Mercedes, perhaps you can help us with the poll numbers. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we've got about 68% saying that they do outsource and another 32% saying no, that they do not. That's kind of exactly what I would have expected to see here. Okay, so what do we mean by a non-core function? So a non-core function is not generally directly related to the primary mission or core activity of an organization. They're most often either a support or an ancillary task that's necessary for the efficient operation of the organization. But I do want to just point out that an outsourced role is no less important. It's just not the core and the primary goal for the organization as a whole. I mean, a great example of that is, Microsoft cannot live without software developers, because that's the product that they build, that's what they make. So that is a core function. And then some things would be less core. And non-core often relates to the size of your organization, and we'll get into that in a minute. Okay, so what do we mean by non-core functions? Here are the most common non-core functions that you typically see outsourced. So it shouldn't be any surprise that legal services are often outsourced. It's rare that you would need a full-time legal counsel on staff. Payroll, accounting, these financial operation functions are most commonly outsourced. Investment oversight, tax compliance. IT is a very common area that you might outsource, particularly if you're a smaller organization. Marketing, advertising, and PR, this is my area of expertise. And what's happened over the last, well, let's go with 30 years, because that's how long I've been doing it. Marketing, where you used to wear one hat, now it takes quite a few specialists to be able to do a full marketing function. So it's not uncommon that you would outsource a specific specialty as part of your overall marketing mix. HR and recruiting, another common outsourced role. Data management, travel, and then in the nonprofit sector, fundraising and membership. So one more question for you guys. Which of the following roles or functions do you currently outsource? Obviously 30-something% of you don't outsource, but for those of you who do, I'd love to know what roles you're actually outsourcing. And so we'll give you a second to fill in, click all that apply, by the way. All right, I'm not seeing any results yet. Okay, so IT and technology support, we've got 63% who outsource IT and tech, legal and compliance, 50%, financial operations, bookkeeping and payroll, AP and AR, 46%. And then runners up to those are human resources and marketing. Okay, some great insights. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the labor market trends that we're seeing. And this is, boy, if there's ever been a roller coaster ride, I'd say we are definitely on it. In fact, I had to change this slide because when I put it together 2 months ago, everything changed between then and 2 days ago. So the current job market is, the unemployment rate is still firmly below pre-pandemic levels, despite the fact that we've now had 3 months of consecutive growth. So 3 months ago, it was at 5%, and now effective as of July, it's at 5.5%. However, that rate increase of 0.5% these last 3 months is actually due to population growth from immigration. So it's a little bit of a tricky stat to look at. The average hourly wage has grown by about 5% in July. And then the other part of the market was, we like to always look at what are the toughest jobs to hire these days. So the top 5 roles that are hardest to hire in 2023, according to Randstad, are software developers, HR managers, mechanical engineers, welders, and accountants and bookkeepers. So welders was a little bit interesting in that mix, but these are the top 5 that we're seeing difficult to hire in 2023. So looking back a little bit, I don't know if you guys have heard about the so-called big quit. And this was a really interesting thing that happened when COVID came. So you had COVID, there were lots of layoffs and work from home situations, which, really got a lot of people thinking about what they wanted to do with their lives, their careers, et cetera. So, you had a lot of people reevaluating and making some changes. A lot of people didn't return to work, or they seized that opportunity to make a big shift in their career or in their priorities in life. Baby boomers retired early. Present company included. I sort of kind of retired, but didn't really. And then the 20-somethings are just walking out. They had a lot of benefits that they could take advantage of and just chose not to work. A lot of mothers stayed home, homeschooling and doing other things during the COVID years. And then you had a lot of people relocate to more affordable areas. And we've seen a lot of that certainly in BC, where people are getting out of the lower mainland and moving into, different municipalities that were more affordable to them. And then this has all really created a fairly sizable price tag for employers in the form of higher salaries and benefits, expanded paid leave, personal days and sabbaticals, and finally increased minimum wage. So what are the current big trends that we're seeing? And none of these should be shocking. But one of the things on the left, you'll see this, and I've read this number is gone anywhere from 50% to 70% in the different stats that I've seen, but half of Canadian workers plan to find a new job in 2023. And I've seen that as high as 70%. So it's going to be an interesting year as we continue through to the back half of H2 and see what happens with people moving around. But the biggest trends right now are this remote work and telecommuting. So nothing shocking here. The technology has made it easy for people to work from home or off site. And most companies are actually adopting some kind of remote work policy. The gig economy. So again, a lot of people are opting to participate in the gig economy, whether that's as a freelancer or a contractor. And rather than holding down that traditional 9-to-5 job with one company, they're taking on gigs. Automation and AI, as you can expect, and I'm sure we've all experienced some version of the Chat GPT phenomenon, but which is just one flavor of AI. But automation and AI generally is having a very big impact on the labor market, particularly because of automation. So a lot of white collar, blue collar roles are being put to pasture, so to speak, as automation and AI really start to set in. Skill specialization. So a lot of people, there's a real demand for very specialized skills. So a lot of people are going back and getting more experience and expertise. So more training and education around certain skills. So you're seeing people really hone in on certain qualifications and skills. Workforce diversification is becoming more and more important for organizations to foster diverse and inclusive workplaces. So that's going to continue to evolve. Learning and reskilling, again, similar to specialization, people are just having to reskill to be able to maintain or find new jobs. The workforce is aging. No big shock here as the baby boomers are moving into retirement. So the biggest challenge there is that knowledge transfer is becoming really difficult to manage. So you've got a workforce that's got all this intelligence from working, for 30, 40 years and not able to transfer knowledge easily to the incoming workforce. So company benefits and perks are being enhanced to attract and retain new talent. Collaboration and teamwork are becoming that much more important because the complexity of getting jobs done is increasing. So the need to collaborate and work as a team is increasing. And lastly, flexible work arrangements. I mean, people have gotten used to working at home and they want to work from home. They'd like to share a job, do job sharing, have flexible hours. So this overall flexibility within the workplace is starting to really be a big thing in the labor market. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Omar.
All right, thank you, Robin. So let's get into some of the pros and cons of outsourcing. So on the pro side, we've got cost optimization, expertise and specialized skills, focus, flexibility and scalability, risk mitigation, efficiency and quality, consistency and results. And I'm sure many of these would not be a surprise to you if you've ever considered outsourcing. Let's dig into a few of these. So on the cost optimization side, yes, the savings can be significant, but depending on the service you're outsourcing, cost optimization does not occur on day one. In fact, it generally doesn't occur on day one. So depending on the services you're outsourcing, your preparedness, and your service provider's preparedness, this can vary quite widely. In some cases, there may in fact not be a cost savings, but rather an improved outcome that you cannot otherwise achieve internally. Focus. This is one that I really like to talk about because I think we often ignore this one. But this ties into focusing on what you do best and outsourcing non-core functions. I often tell our clients that you didn't get into your line of work to deal with administration. You got into it to help your organization achieve a mission and to create real change. So why are you spending precious time trying to manage some routine administrative function that keeps you away from focusing on your mission? And then just a third one that I wanted to highlight is consistency and results. So when you outsource routine ongoing processes, you delegate the management requirements around making sure that the tasks are actually undertaken. You should be able to achieve a higher degree of consistency, and you should spend time focusing on results. Many service providers will self-report in some shape or form. Maybe it's in the form of a monthly, quarterly, or annual report to you. Reporting of this type really shows the maturity of the service provider that you're working with and also adds a layer of transparency to the relationship. So one thing I'd recommend you do is, when evaluating a potential service provider, ask them what they do on this front. All right. Let's talk about some of the cons, some of the drawbacks of outsourcing. So communication and coordination issues. So you need to make sure that your organization designates a point person who's responsible for the contract and for making the relationship successful. Let me be absolutely clear, and this is often a misconception, but outsourcing is not a set it and forget it relationship. It requires some level of oversight and support to the service provider. Dependency on external service providers. This is where documentation is really key. You don't want to put your organization at risk because of the knowledge that you're transferring to a service provider. So make sure you have documentation on your own systems and processes that can protect you in the event that the relationship is terminated. Again, this is something that you could talk to a potential service provider in advance. Data security and confidentiality risks. Really, I think the best approach here is to inquire with a service provider on how they plan to manage your data. Look for cybersecurity compliance through compliance frameworks like ISO 27001. And also ask a potential service provider what they do at a practical level to ensure that the data is appropriately managed and safeguarded. Of course, there are other considerations, cultural and ethical considerations, and this, of course, may vary depending on your organization. And then hidden costs and contractual issues, of course, is another thing that may, of course, matters in some shape or form to every organization, but how it matters and the specifics of what matters can vary organization to organization. Other considerations. So some of this is a little bit of a recap. Like the first point here, as I mentioned, outsourcing does not mean that you set it and forget it. It is a relationship that does require some level of ongoing oversight. Someone within your organization needs to be accountable for the results of the service provider and for making the relationship successful. So who is responsible for sending inputs to your service provider? That's one question you might want to ask. It's typically the person that's responsible for the relationship. And also, who's responsible for communicating organizational changes to the service provider? So let's use the example of, you're outsourcing HR. How does that communication channel work? How is that outsourced HR partner informed of a termination within the organization? What does that framework look like? Okay. Some best practices to consider when outsourcing. So there's a few items here. First, define clear objectives and requirements. This is something that I actually recommend that you do before you speak to any service providers. Really be clear on what it is that you're looking for before you start the research and before you start speaking to service providers, but then make it clear as to what those objectives and requirements are. Conduct a thorough vendor evaluation. It's the old concept of looking for 3 service providers and selecting one. I really believe that that is the best approach, and that way you can make the most informed decision. Third item here is establish clear communication channels. So how do I get in touch with someone in XYZ scenario? Many service providers will have a very clear communication channel and contact people that they'll introduce you to in the onboarding process. Develop a detailed service level agreement. Again, this is something that the service provider is probably going to have. But for instance, if I have an urgent inquiry, how quickly can I get in touch with somebody? Is it an hour? Is it a day? Is it a week? Those are things you're going to want to know going into the relationship. Implement robust contract management. Another point here is provide adequate training and knowledge transfer. Again, a service provider who has done this sort of thing before, whatever you are outsourcing, they will likely have a framework in place for this. So inquire about that framework and make sure that you have the right people there to communicate and to provide the knowledge to the new service provider as to how things work and what the outcomes you're expecting are. Maintain performance monitoring and evaluation. So consciously make sure that you sit down with the service provider or that you look internally at how things are going. And of course, it'll depend on the nature of the service. Foster a collaborative relationship. Relationships are, of course, always key, but make sure that you maintain that relationship with your service provider. And then the final point here is to plan for continuity and risk mitigation. And again, this will vary from service provider to service provider and depending on the nature of the relationship, but it's something you should consider when thinking about outsourcing. Other things to consider when selecting third-party providers. How do they deliver the service? What does their administration and client support function look like? Do they get you? How deep have they gone into understanding you and your problem? This is something that I think starts at the sales process, but will continue in the early days of the relationship. But just make sure that you have an overall level of comfort here, that they're asking the right questions. Do they have a partner versus vendor mindset? Of course, my preferred approach would be the partner mindset. We want to be in this for the long term. We want to be working with you over the long term. So what does that relationship look like? Do they understand the space you're in? Make sure that they have other clients like you. They've worked with other organizations with similar needs to yours. Do they have a proven track record with references who sing their praises? A great place to go is a company's website where you can look at case studies and comments from past or existing clients. You can also look at Google reviews. Do they take data security seriously? Again, this ties into some of the previous comments we've made, but just really get an understanding overall for how they'll manage your data. What policies and protocols do they have in place? Okay. Reviewing contracts. So now that you've selected a service provider, what terms should you look out for in an engagement letter? A few common ones that I always look for. One, the term of the contract. So is it a 1-year commitment? Is it a 1-month commitment? It can significantly vary service provider to service provider. So just make sure you read the terms and conditions on this so that you're not surprised later on. The scope of services. So what is included and what is not included? Many service providers do this where they provide a list of items that are not included. Those often come about as a result of, people thinking that those things are included and they're not and being surprised. So a list of exclusions, if you are presented with one, is actually a positive thing. And who owns the data? So ask that question. In your relationship with the service provider, if we part ways, what does that mean for the data? Who ultimately owns it? And who owns the systems? So if your service provider is putting you on a third-party system, in the event that you part ways, do you just assume that software license, or are you left in a position where you need to migrate data and start over again? So is outsourcing right for you? So this evaluation tool enables you to score the potential benefit against 14 different criteria. So obviously, the more beneficial the answer, the higher the score. So for example, it is highly undesirable to outsource a core activity, so the activity should be scored low if core. A score of less than 70% overall places outsourcing in doubt. We won't spend too much time on here, but the webinar recording will be available, and we suggest that you use this tool when considering what to outsource in your organization. So where we've seen great success. So as I mentioned at the beginning, since launching Inkle, we've outsourced a number of services. We've also worked with over 100 not-for-profit organizations as clients. Most of our not-for-profit organizations have an annual operating budget of $500,000 in revenue to $5 million in revenue. And these are the 3 most common functions that we see outsourced. So accounting, and this is because, I'm speaking from our pool of existing clients, but, the poll that we did at the beginning was also telling of that. Human resources, and IT management and data security. So if you're a small NPO, it's unlikely that you need a full-time resource in any of these areas. That said, these are critical functions to your organization. We strongly suggest that you look for a service provider who can support you in these areas. Finally, as we get to the end of our presentation for today, I just want to leave you with a quote from one of our clients. So we've been working with Rebecca Pauls and Plan since 2019. We've been supporting her, or we were supporting Plan initially with bookkeeping, payroll, and payables. The needs grew during COVID. The relationship evolved. And today we provide a broader scope of services. We serve Rebecca and Plan with fractional controllership services. We manage her audit. We provide high quality reporting that really meets the specific needs of stakeholders. So I'll just read what Rebecca had to say really quickly. I think outsourcing is the way of the future for nonprofits. The philanthropic world is reluctant to fund costly operations and administration because it takes dollars away from the core mission. Not only am I getting great multidisciplinary services, but my costs to get that level of service are way lower than they would be if I had to hire all of the people to do the work and then manage them day to day. So this is a really telling example and summary of how outsourcing can have a profound impact on your organization. So we have an opportunity for you. You can scan this QR code. You can scan it now, or you can scan it when you get the webinar recording, but you can get a 30-minute assessment of your bookkeeping needs. I will be running these 30-minute sessions, and I'd be happy to cover any questions that you have about bookkeeping and accounting specifically. So go ahead and scan that code, and I look forward to speaking to you. All right, let's get into the fun part, the questions. So I'm just going to switch gears here on my screen for a moment. Just bear with me. Robin, are you seeing the questions on your end?
I am not.
Sorry, looks like a little technical glitch on our end.
Yeah, sorry, it says screen sharing has paused.
We can jump in and help with the Q&A portion then, if that works.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
For sure. So the first question I'm seeing is the increase in unemployment good or bad? I think they're speaking about a previous slide.
So can you repeat that question?
Is the increase in unemployment good or bad? So I think they're referencing when you were speaking about the unemployment rate going up.
Mm-hmm. I guess if I have to pick a black and white answer to that, unemployment rate climbing is not a good thing because it means more people, in the country that are looking for jobs that don't have jobs. I think that, to just, take this concept one step further and how it applies to not-for-profit organizations. The story is that the unemployment rate is still quite low. We are seeing a situation where, it ultimately is hard to find people for non-core functions, and it will continue to be the case. And so that's why, we really believe that outsourcing presents an opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, the record low for unemployment is 4.9%. So to be at 5.5, we are still
We're really
low.
close to that.
Thank you. I think they were trying to catch that gauge, right, to see what the actual threshold would be to be considered bad. So I think that definitely answers that question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then the next question is, what does hard to hire mean?
Good question. Hard to hire is what I've been experiencing for a number of years. It just really means that there are, it's a quote unquote seller's market, so to speak, for people looking for work, right? People come with multiple or have multiple job offers. And so you can put a lot of time and energy into your hiring function, find a fantastic candidate and be unsuccessful. That's the way I would define it.
Yeah,
that's great insight for sure.
Sorry, say that again, Mercedes.
I said that's great insight. I think that's kind of what they were actually looking for when they were inquiring about the hard to hire portion, because you were mentioning it on a previous slide. Just because I think that they are just trying to gauge what that would mean for their organization or kind of what the sector is facing for hiring.
Yeah. And I will say that it's it would be different for different roles, right? Hiring for accounting roles is very, very difficult. Hiring for other roles may not be. And so within that, unemployment number, there's a lot of different stories at play.
Mm-hmm.
True. Perfect. Thank you so much. And then on to the next question we have from Will. A question I have would be, what are the potential liabilities with outsourcing, especially around responsibilities as employers? How do I make sure we are not abdicating our support of the outsourced individual or making sure they are cared for?
So let me just make sure I understand the question there. So I think the question is with respect to the employees of the company that you're outsourcing to. Is that the sort of general question, and what are the ethical considerations there?
I would say so. So they're more so looking into the potential liabilities with outsourcing, how that would affect their nonprofit. And then it said especially around responsibilities as employers for that first question. So I think that this is a two-parter. So they're more so looking for the first portion to learn a little bit more about the liabilities with outsourcing and how they would be responsible as an employer for managing that relationship.
Okay, so the liability side, anytime you are, well, really, there's liability in many things that we do. But when you're outsourcing, there can be liability with respect to how data is managed. So that's one thing you'll want to understand. There's, as I was mentioning on that previous slide, the protocols that are in place around data, you'll want to understand those. Robin, anything else to add there?
Yeah, I just think when it comes to staff, and I think that was part of the question, if I heard it correctly, the staff is typically fully, the personnel that are working with you are fully employed by and managed by the third party provider.
Right.
So any risk or liability is the third party provider's risk and liability. It's not yours just because an employee of their organization is working with your organization. So the liability resides with a third party.
Great, thank you. Okay, and then the second part of that question was just how to make sure that the outsourced individual feels supported in the organization. So what systems and processes do you recommend having in place when you're considering outsourcing?
Yeah, so I would actually put a lot of this on the service provider that you're engaging with. Ask them what the onboarding process looks like. And if they've worked with organizations like yours, they should have, checklists and processes in place to get you into their systems and to make their people successful. So that's definitely something I would do before you, find and commit to a particular organization. But one thing, as being on the other side of it, where new clients are coming in, something that makes the onboarding process significantly more efficient, more effective, is where we are able to get like process manuals, where there's documentation on a process. It alleviates a lot of questions that we might otherwise have for our client, and it just provides our team with a really great starting point.
Yeah, and I would like to just add to that. So in my role, both as a fractional, which is an outsourced function, I have worked off and on with a number of different clients over the years. And one of the things, obviously marketing is my area of expertise, but one of the things that's really important is when you do start working with a third party, is that you make sure they have access to the information they need. So in a case of marketing, for example, marketing is dependent upon having all information, content, tools, everything within the organization. So really structuring a good, solid onboarding process for them is really important. Now, what Omar's talking about is an organization like when you're outsourcing something like legal or financial operations, bookkeeping, accounting, I would really look to those organizations to have strong procedures, processes, checklists already in place. There's just, and that my point being, it's a little bit different depending upon the kind of service you're outsourcing. But from a marketing point of view, you'd want to have a very solid onboarding plan so that you can indoctrinate them into your organization.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question kind of tags on to that last one. Would a lack of accountability be a con to outsourcing, especially when outsourcing something as important as accounting and tax compliance?
I actually think the accountability is a little bit more clear cut when you outsource. So, the reality is the relationship becomes a little bit more transactional and clear in that I'm engaging XYZ service provider to deliver on XYZ. So, you want to make sure you have those conversations up front about, as we mentioned earlier, what your expectations are. But as long as you have clarity on what those expectations are, it should be in the context of a relationship, an outsourced relationship, easier to measure the outcome. Now, if you can't, that could be an indication that you're actually not clear on what you're looking for, and you may not be ready to outsource in that case.
True. Okay, thank you. So the next question, can you address who should own data when working with a third party for outsourcing? Shouldn't the nonprofit own the data?
I would say generally, yes. I'm trying to think of, I would say I would say universally, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, unless it's a collaboration of some sort where it's a joint effort. I'm just trying to imagine scenarios
That's
where
actually,
it would be, but like if you were to join forces with another organization,
right.
a large research project or something like that, then it would be jointly earned, but owned. But
that's a good point.
Yeah.
And actually, Robin, that triggered me on another point, like joint software projects. That can be a situation where, it's different. Maybe there's some kind of shared ownership.
True. Okay, thank you. So on to the next question. Which HR functions are suitable for outsourcing and which should be kept internal at the organization?
So I've actually seen pretty broad realm of HR outsourced successfully, and the sort of tactical day-to-day HR, like the administration, making sure that monthly check-ins are happening, making sure that annual conversations about salaries are occurring. What you can't outsource, though, is the active management of employees. So that needs to stay with the organization. And so you need to be able to clearly distinguish between HR and sort of operating day-to-day managers. I think that's, an area that you can't outsource. And then headhunting and recruiting is one that I've also seen successfully outsourced. Robin, do you have any additional comments there?
No, I think that's right. I think it's the performance management that really needs to stay in-house, and everything else is I've seen successfully outsourced a number of times with a lot of different clients and different companies I coach and mentor.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of like a racy metrics concept. Responsibility versus accountability can be two different things. With respect to HR, you can have a third party, responsible for making sure that the one-on-one happens, but they're not the ones that are actually accountable for doing it. It is the manager of the employee, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. So we have another function related question as well that's similar to that HR question. So within the context of marketing and communications, have you found organizations specifically outsourcing their social media channels?
Yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, Robin, that one's for you.
Absolutely. It's one of those things that if you don't have somebody who's really plugged into social media, how it operates, how to use it effectively, then it's definitely something you can outsource quite easily and frankly, typically at a lower cost. So social media for sure. And that is the challenge with marketing, is that it's over, when I started my career, it was like a one hat does all kind of thing. And now it's segmented or fragmented into so many micro disciplines. And it's not really realistic that one person can do it all anymore. And so some of those things like social media, even content production, easily outsourced from a marketing point of view.
Thank you, Robin. And we just have a couple questions coming through about that QR code on the past page for the free consultation. Do you mind just please going back a slide so they can scan that?
Sure. Hang on. Let me just see if I can do this without messing up.
Perfect. Thank you. And now this question is about liability regarding the accuracy of data, particularly regarding accounting/auditing financial data. So what is the liability of the organization which has outsourced these roles?
So this is a tricky one. And this is one that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And at the end of the day, liability becomes tricky because errors and inaccuracies often occur due to a lack of inputs or a lack of accurate inputs. So it's not one that, in really accounting, but in a lot of outsourcing functions, the liability to a large extent does live with the organization. The way I like to explain this to my clients is think about the third party you're engaging as an extension of your team, right? You want to make sure that you have the relationship in place to collaborate effectively, to make sure that the inputs are flowing effectively, and you become mutually invested in making sure that you get to the right outcome.
Great, thank you. So another question for organizations interested in outsourcing, what are the top tips you would give them to make the partnership effective?
This sounds like a little bit of a cliche, but I'd say communication. Like, communication is everything. Once at Ankle, once we engage with a client, we try to encourage our clients, just email us or call us if you ever have an issue about anything. Keep those lines of communication going. All service providers want to ultimately help you achieve your goal. So just keep communicating, I would say.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add to that because I come at this obviously from a slightly different point of view, but you really want to find an organization that brings process and to the table. Because if an organization, a partner that helps you run your organization doesn't bring that to the table, you're going to waste a lot of time and money trying to find your way together. So you want somebody who really does have proven processes that you can just basically, there's flexibility, but they're there to start with. And that really just, it reduces your onboarding time. It reduces your cost associated with getting involved with a partner. It's just, you want somebody who comes to the table with a lot of discipline and a lot of process. And I think that's one of the most, and I agree with Omar, communication is so critical, because without it, no process is going to ever work if you're not communicating. But the two together is what makes it magic.
Robin, that's a fantastic point. That's really where a third party will create value for you. If you are just finding a third party that's going to do what's being done the way it's being done, then it really is just a dollar and cents exercise, right? Which one's cheaper at the end of the day. But an organization that brings process, helps you reduce the amount of input time, helps you, drive better results, that's where the value is.
And your team gets to learn through the process, and their game gets raised as a process, as a part of learning all the things from that partner.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So we have quite a specific question here. What sort of accounting procedures are outsourced?
Yeah, great question. So there's I'll get a little bit into the weeds here since this is a specific question. So at Ankle, we focus on financial operations, and the 5 services that we found, that can be successfully outsourced. And by the way, by financial operations, I mean the stuff that keeps your organization going throughout the year. So bookkeeping, payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and controllership services. So those are the 5 we found to be excellent candidates for outsourcing. We've built processes around them. There's, of course, the relationship with your CPA and your year-end accounting, your year-end accountant. That's a little bit different in my view. So yeah, it would be, in my view, those 5 core services that are great candidates for outsourcing.
Thank you, Omar. So another question here, is there a general threshold of annual revenue that you would recommend we start outsourcing accounting and HR?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I have found that until about the $250,000 a year in annual operating budget level on the accounting side, it becomes hard for, to outsource and to do so on a cost benefit basis. in those cases, in smaller organizations, we often see the treasurer taking a much heavier role in the accounting function. The other thing you can look at is less frequent processing. So you can look at quarterly bookkeeping or monthly AP or quarterly AP for that matter. So there are ways to get around it, but 250,000 seems to be the magic number. I would say less comfortable providing a threshold on the HR side, but I hazard a guess that it might be about the same.
Yeah, and the HR might be more of a measure of how many employees, staffing you're dealing with. If it's just 1 or 2 shifts or additions or, a year, then you might not need the service, but if you've got slightly more, it would make more sense.
Yeah. I often also see smaller organizations leveraging freelancers quite extensively. So HR might even be less of an issue at that point.
Thank you. Well, we have quite a few questions rolling in about how to reach out to you for more information. So would you mind just please sharing that last slide again so they can see your social handles and your email addresses and that type of thing?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. Well, at this stage, I think that we're pretty much closing in on the hour mark. So thank you for such a great presentation. Do you happen to have any final comments before we sign off today?
Final comment for me would be, if you want to learn more, if you're interested in exploring, particularly on the finance side, what outsourcing might look like, please reach out to me. I'll be the one having the conversations with you. We also have a lot of really great material on our website. We have hundreds of blogs, many of them geared towards a not-for-profit audience, and a lot of downloadable content as well. So please have a look there if it's something specific that you're looking for.
Yeah, and the guide that's here on this last slide, it goes into a fair bit more depth on a handful of non-core functions. So there might be a lot more information that you can glean from that if you download this document.
Amazing. Well, thank you
Excellent.
so much, Omar and Robin.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind everyone that you will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webinar recording. Please feel free to share this link with your colleagues. The email will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar. You should see a survey link pop up right here in Zoom following the session as well. On behalf of Charity Village, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you'll join us for our next free webinar, Thinking Outside the Box to Raise More for Your Cause. You can find more information on this and all of our upcoming webinars at charityvillage.com/webinars. Thanks again for joining us today. I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.